Hello, this is Gökmen Altay. In this video, I am going to present you Reproducible Miracles, which is based on my book, which I published in 2019 and then updated recently. In this book, what you are going to see is the mathematical codings as patterns, not randomly found codings, but I will show that there are mathematical patterns in the text of Quran, which was followed by around 1.8 billion Muslims around the world. Let me also clarify that all the evidences in this book was discovered by myself in 2019, and then until now I also updated with some newly discovered evidences myself. The reason I emphasize this is because it is possible that there may be some other people who try to plagiarize and then make big claims about Islam, because there were early attempts in around 1974, and one of the person who had tried a similar thing had claimed to be a prophet. So anyways, I'm a scientist, I'm just an ordinary Muslim. I don't claim anything from the beginning. I want to tell, because my expertise is in message coding in general, but specifically error control coding. I have my PhD in error control coding. I have developed my own algorithms to be able to receive the message without error or with less error. So there is a branch of science that's called error control coding or message coding in telecommunications. And in that, the goal is to be able to develop codes over the message or code the message in order to receive the message error-free at the receiver side. So, since Quran is a message, when I heard about this 19-based coding claims, I thought it makes sense. It is possible that there might be some coding in this message as well, so that we can understand. There is a coding in this message and it is intact. The message is error-free. So it makes sense from the scientific point of view. It is not some unrelated thing. Therefore, because of my expertise, I just made some hypotheses over the text of Quran. As I see, they have been successful along with some unsuccessful ones. I put forward further hypotheses and witnessed that there are codings and which shows a clear coding patterns in the text of Quran. So in this video I'm going to show you most important part of these evidences, which I presented in chapter 5 as the main 19 system of the full text of Quran. The reason I call that as the main 19 system, because I categorized the chapters with respect to how important or how clear are those evidences. How strong are those evidences? And the ones on chapter 5 is very clear. That shows us, in my opinion, without a doubt, that there is a coding pattern. And since we witnessed that coding pattern in the text of Quran, in the full text of Quran, then we can say, okay, there's a coding, there's a design in the text. Therefore, it must be intact. This at least shows us a testable evidence on the text of Quran. We Muslims already accept that the Quran is fully intact and not changed at all, word by word. So the full text of Quran is accepted as uncorrupted, unchanged for the last 1400 years by all the Muslims. But now in 2019, I have discovered design in the full text of Quran, 19 base coding designs in the full text of Quran, that shows, that in my opinion proves that the text of Quran has a design in it, therefore it is unchanged, it is intact. Otherwise, if there were even a single word change, or the order was changed, then we would most likely not observe, not witness all of those evidences, because all are interdependent, because all the evidences use the same natural numbers of the text. If one of the words even are different or wrong, or the order is wrong, then almost most of the evidences should collapse. In this video, I'm going to present to you Chapter 5, where I present the main 19 system of the full text of Quran. If some of you would like to try to falsify my claims, my codings, feel free to do so, but try to do that on Chapter 5 first, because it is the main chapter. It is the core of the system, what I present, what I witness. Because in Chapter 6, there are less strong, not as strong as the main ones, supporting evidences in Chapter 6. In Chapter 7, I also show some ladder-based evidences, but it's a different topic. It depends on the text I choose. But this Chapter 5 and Chapter 6 does not include the ladder information, but only includes chapters, verses, and the words information. Therefore, it shows the design in the full text of Quran with respect to chapters, verses, and words. The text I use is the common one, which is called the Hafs mushaf by Muslims. It is used by around 97% of all Muslims. Although the standard narrative is different, I agree with Dr. Shehzad Salim, who has studied the history of Quran for about 20 years. He has done his PhD on this topic, and he ended up with this narrative that only Hafs Musaf is Quran and the rest are slightly distorted versions. The rest of the Musafs, like the Warsh and others, are not Quran. They are slightly distorted versions of the text of Quran. Although standard narrative accepts all of them, in my opinion, it does not make sense to accept more than a single full text of Quran. If you are interested, I will also provide a link from which you can watch our interview with Dr. Shehzad Salim. I asked Dr. Shehzad Salim all the questions I had about this topic, history of Quran, and he answered all my questions. It can further enlighten you on this topic. Anyways, long story short, Hafs Musaf is Quran, which is used by already 97% of Muslims, and it is the common Quran. And the design I'm going to present you is based on Hafs Musaf, which is the common one. And if you need further information, how did I get the text of Quran, you can go to Chapter 3, it's about text of Quran, and you can see all the information. Where did I download this text? If you like, if you are interested, you can go to tanzil.net, download link, and you can download the text I downloaded, which is Hafs, the simple version of the text without any dots, any harakes. So it is the most simple one. I can show you one example. As you see, there are no harakes in this text version. So I only count the number of words and the number of verses and the chapter indexes. Let me start introducing you the most important evidences. You can read the details from the book, but I will just overview to make sure you can more easily understand. As you see at Chapter 5.1, I explain the rules and descriptions of the main 19 system. Without rules, we cannot talk about a system. If you see any such a claim, you need to ask what are the rules, that I can derive all the possible trials from your rules, which I attempt to do here in this section. I describe all the rules. Mainly, in this evidences in the Chapter 5, the main one is, the rules are like this. So I hypothesized that the Quran is it's not as simple, the Quran is not a short book. There are 6,348 verses in that. It's a big book, therefore it is not easy to discover the codings without clues. Therefore I hypothesized that God might have left clues for us. And where should I look at for that? Well, it should be obvious. It should be very obvious to any Muslim. And therefore I looked at most commonly recited chapter, which was memorized by all the Muslims, and it is called Al-Fatiha. That is the first chapter. So where would you look the clues? It makes sense to look at the first chapter first, and that should be a short chapter as well. As in this case, the Fatiha, Al-Fatiha is a short chapter. This is the head of the table of the chapter indexes, number of words at each chapter, and number of words and number of letters as well. So as you see, this first chapter has only 7 verses and only 29 words. So anyone can manually work on this and try to see if there are codings exist in this chapter. And what I did is I hypothesized that God might have left clues in this chapter, because this is memorized by all the Muslims, because it is deemed essential that we need to recite, Muslims need to recite this chapter, Al-Fatiha, in all the 5 daily prayers. The others are optional, but this is considered as a must by the tradition, let's say. So therefore, all the Muslims memorize that. So given the clues in the most memorized and most known chapter makes sense. And in the first chapter as well, which is also a short chapter, which anyone can even manually work on that, which I did. And what I realized first is, you see 1, 7, 29. By the way, I only looked at the chapter index, verse sums, and number of words in the evidences in this chapter 5. I did not consider the letters. The reason is that I also hypothesized that because when you write some of the words, the writings might have different number of letters, although you write the same word in some different texts, even in the Hafs mushaf. For example, it is similar to the British color to the English American color. The way you write them is different. Even in some cases, the pronunciation might be slightly different, but you are talking about the same word. So therefore, counting the words makes the evidences solid and without any doubt that we are working on the same text. And whatever we witness as an evidence, then we would not have any doubt that that belongs to the Hafs mushaf in that case, at least the common Hafs mushaf. Okay, when I looked at these numbers, it is very obvious. When you add those digits, as you see, 1 plus 7 plus 2 plus 9, that is exactly 19. So that took my attention. I also used the concatenation operation, which means you just merge a number like 1729 together, and you get 1729 in this case, and you concatenate them. And I realized it's also a multiple of 19. So there are two 19-based codings exist in the first chapter at the chapter level data. This is chapter level data. So we look at each chapter index and how many verses in that chapter, 7 verses, how many words in that chapter, 29 words. So this is the chapter level data. When I saw these two codings, so I thought they might be clue. So what I hypothesized then, okay, then God might have left them as clue, and they can exist in the full text of Quran as well, if they are clue. And I extrapolated this same coding pattern over the full text of Quran, and then I witnessed that the same coding pattern exists in the full text of Quran as well. Then I further hypothesized further similar codings in the first chapter of Fatiha, and then I realized more codings, and I also extrapolate them again similarly to the full text of Quran. I witnessed more evidences also exist in the full text of Quran as well. So I hypothesized that they are left as clues and they exist in the full text of Quran as well. Of course, there are also some unsuccessful trials as well, but overall, statistically, we can look at how many of the codings out of how many trials we observed, and then we can measure the probability of what we observe. That's what I've done in, for example, chapter 5.11. If we go there, we can just see what we observed statistically. As we see, there are only one codings I observed which was not available in the full text of Quran, but the rest were validated. Whatever we observed in the Al-Fatiha in the first chapter as a coding, 19-based coding, it will also exist in the full text of Quran. And when we measure that, it's here. So since I put forward rules, it is a rule-based system. Therefore, I tried more than the successful trials. In this case, there are 5 successes based on Al-Fatiha. There are 5 successes, 5 codings, which is successful, which will exist in the Al-Fatiha and also exist in the full text of Quran, out of 14 trials, based on the rules I set myself, based on what I observe. So the probability of this, what is that? Because we are looking at 19-based system, and the probability of observing any single number to be multiple of 19 is 1 over 19. And this gives us a probability with binomial test, a probability of around 5.4 out of 10,000 trials. So it is a very significant result. Not only that, I also put forward further hypothesis based on a verse in Quran. I will talk about that. That is odd and even numbers. I can show that here. So in Quran there is one verse like this, 89:3, chapter 89, verse 3. In that God gives us this verse as an independent verse. And it is this, as you see here, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, by the even and the odd. So this is an independent word. God shows us there might be something special about the even and odd. So what I hypothesize based on that is, of course it might mean different things, but it might also mean a coding, an even and odd based coding in the text of Quran as well. So it might refer to some miraculous creations of God. And this might be one of them. The text of Quran is also a creation of God. And then I hypothesize that there might also be even and odd based codings in the most important evidences which I observed in the chapter 5 based on Al-Fatiha. So in the rules I also put forward, I hypothesized that, so whatever the codings I observe, in that case 5 codings as you see here, we had 5 successful codings in Al-Fatiha. So whatever the successful codings we observe, there should also be an odd and even based coding exist along with that same successful coding. This was my hypothesis, and mostly it was validated. So not only we observe the Al-Fatiha based codings, but all those successful evidences almost have also even and odd based codings as well along with that. So this chapter includes therefore Al-Fatiha based evidences plus the odd and even based evidences together. So how many odd and even based evidences we observed? It's here. I also measured that separately to see, to be able to measure what we observe, how significant is that. And as you see, out of those, again I put forward rules, and based on those rules, out of those 5 successes, we had 4 successful odd and even evidences along with them. So based on the rules, we had to try 8 trials. In chapter 5.13, I showed the overall probability of what we observed based on Al-Fatiha along with the odd and even based evidences. And in total, we have, in this case, 9 successes out of 22 trials with the probability of 1/19. That gives us 8.2 times 10 to the power minus 7. Like less than 1 in a million what we observe could occur by chance alone, we can say. Okay, now let me also talk about why do I choose 19, because there is also a special word in Quran that is independent. I mean, there are different numbers, but there's an independent number in Quran, and it is special. There is only this number. I cannot try any other number. It doesn't make sense because there is no context in that. But for the 19, there is a context. As you see in chapter 74, verse 30, there is this independent verse. It says, over it is 19. So as you see, this is independent, although there are other verses that includes numbers, but within the context. But in this case, this is an independent verse. So some scholars interpret that this might also refer to 19-based coding in the text of Quran. But the tradition interprets this differently with the other verses before and after this verse. They think this is the number of guardians for the hell or something, but it is not clear. There are 2 types of verses in Quran, which is also explained in Quran. Some of them very clear, that's called muhkam verses, the solid ones, that's obvious for everyone. But there are also some interpretable mutashabih verses, and this is one of them. So we interpret that as it might refer to 19-based system in the text of Quran. Maybe it might also refer to the guardians, but both might be true, or one of them might be true. In my case, my book shows that at least we see this verse refers to the coding which I discovered in 29 in the text of Quran, in the full text of Quran, that shows the Quran is intact and unchanged. Okay, let me quickly go over chapter 5 after explaining all the details. Again, before starting, let me also explain the text type of Quran. There are 6,236 numbered verses, and there are 112 unnumbered verses in the text of Quran. So when you read that, you see there are verses there that they are repetitions, 112 of them, they are Basmala verse. But it is only numbered in the first verse, in the Al-Fatiha. Let me show that again. Okay, it is this verse. This is the verse, Basmala verse. That means Bismillahirrahmanirrahim in Arabic, which means in the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate. So this verse is only numbered in the first chapter, Al-Fatiha. For the rest of the chapters, we observe this verse again in the beginning, but there is no number given. It was in the text like that, in the common Hafs mushaf. But also, interestingly, in chapter 9, there is neither numbered or unnumbered Basmala verse. There is none of them. Chapter 9 just starts as independent chapter. So the structure is different than all the other books that I have come across so far. So therefore, I thought how to include these structural bizarre situation, let's say. So therefore, I thought, okay, both of the text types might have codings in that. So whatever the coding I hypothesize, I will apply that to both of the text types. All the 6,236 numbered verses only, and also all the 6,348 verses. Therefore, I include those trials in my probability calculations, and whatever we witness is based on these number of trials that I apply both of the text types. Okay, let's start now the chapter 5, the main 90 system of the full text of Quran I discovered. Okay, so it is evidence of silence, harmony among chapters, verses and verse. Let's remember the chapter level data. So also I look at the chapter level data of the text. So those are natural numbers. As you see here, you see chapter level data, the head of them, of the full text of Quran. For example, in chapter 1, this is chapter index, there are 7 verses and 29 words and 148 letters. But in these evidence, we are not going to look at the letters, so you can ignore that. In the chapter 2, we have 287 verses and 6,144 words. And so on it goes. There are 114 chapters in Quran, so it is also a multiple of 19, which kind of suggests there might be something special about 19 from the beginning. Very simple. In Bismillahirrahmanirrahim verse, this is the first verse of chapter 1, as I mentioned before. There are 19 letters, for example. So all Muslims repeat that before starting anything. Actually, that's the tradition. So in this chapter, in this evidence, I will show that what we observe in the chapter level data is also exists in the full text of Quran. In this case, we are going to test this clue of the Al-Fatiha. So in Al-Fatiha we have let's come back, chapter 1. Number of verses of chapter 1 is 7 and number of words are 29. And when you concatenate them, so basically this is my default coding pattern, concatenation of the natural numbers in the natural order. The natural order is from chapter to verse and words and letters if it is included. In this case it is not. So we only concatenate the natural numbers in the natural order from chapter to verse. Otherwise there are many combinations. It doesn't make sense to try all of them. In the end you should find something. But this is the most meaningful one. So all the codings must be meaningful, whatever I put forward. Okay, so we concatenate them in natural order. Already Al-Fatiha teaches us that one anyway. Before that I had hypothesized this way, but Al-Fatiha kind of validated, kind of reassured my hypothesis from the beginning. Concatenation of natural numbers in the natural order. So as we learn from here, this gives us a coding. Okay, now we extrapolate that to the full text of Quran, and we observe, I do that with our coding here, so that people can easily reproduce my tests without any hassle. And as you see, I concatenate each chapter numbers, chapter level numbers 1, 7, 2, 9, and then second chapter, and then third chapter, and then in the natural order. And then we again concatenate those numbers in the natural order together. This is the tail of numbers. These are the head of numbers, just to make people understand better. And I do it here, and as you see, I test whether the big number, the big representation number, is multiple of 19 or not. It is multiple of 19. Mod 19 is 0. And the number of digits of this big number is 800. I show it here. And this is the number, as you see here. So when you concatenate, okay, the chapter level numbers of the full text of Quran, as you see, you get this single number, single big number, 800 digits number. And this number is multiple of 19. Why is that special? Because we applied the same coding pattern of the Al-Fatiha. And I had hypothesized and I put forward the rules based on that whatever we observe in Al-Fatiha as 19-based coding is also exist in the full text of Quran. And as we see with this number, it is validated. So as you see in this, it starts from the chapter 1 and it has 7, number of verses is 7 and number of verses 29. It starts to the second chapter and then number of verses is 287 and number of verses is 6144 and so on it goes. You can check my book. This is the link. It is free. My book is free from bookdown.org. This link I will provide in the descriptions below. So in this number, as you see, all the information is there. I mean, the also order of the chapters is important. If the order was changed, the number would be different and it doesn't have to be multiple of 19. We most likely 95% of chance it would be different, at least we can say. So this is the first evidence. Okay, before going forward, what I had hypothesized, whatever we observe in Al-Fatiha, which is validated in the full text of Quran, and must also have the odd and even based evidence as well. And I tested that in this number, okay, and I witnessed that this number has also odd and even based coding pattern based evidence. By the way, as you see, I count how many trials I did and how many successful codings I observed. In this case, I tried 2 codings because we could apply that in the numbered verses as well. As you see here, I use all the verses, all the 6,348 verses text type of Quran. The second text type was only the numbered 6,236 verses. So we could get a similar number from the 6,236 verses, and we have to test it as well. As you see, we have observed the successful evidence in the full text of Quran with 6,348 verses. But as you see here, I count both of them. Why do I do that? Because I'm going to calculate, I'm going to measure what we observe. I'm going to measure the probability of what we observe in the end. So I need to count how many trials, how many successes I've done. So 2 trials, 1 success in this coding. So for this one, so my next hypothesis, okay, what we observe here is should also have odd and even based evidences. Again, we check both of text types per the universal rule. Whatever the coding we put forward, we have to test in both of text types. Okay, and when I test the odd and even based evidence, I also observe that there is an odd and even based coding exists in this coding pattern. So how do I get odd and even based coding? Let me show you here. I separate the chapters based on their index to be even or odd. If they are even, if the chapter index is even, then that is designated as even chapter. If the chapter has odd, like 1, 3, 5, then it is designated as odd chapter. So there are therefore 57 even chapters and 57 odd chapters. Okay, and then what happens is this. Let me just summarize the coding pattern. Okay, here I do that. Again, I get I concatenate the natural numbers of the even chapters within itself, and I get those numbers as you see here. The head of the even chapter numbers to 227 to chapter 2 and 287 words in that, and 6,144 words in that. And then next chapter is chapter 4, you see, and it goes like that. Chapter 6, chapter 8. And similarly, I get the numbers, representation numbers of the chapters, odd chapters. It's here. I do that here, you see. And we get the head of the odd chapters. The first chapter, Al-Fatiha 1-7-29. And then next chapter 3, chapter 10, and so on. Okay, so how do we combine these two numbers? I have a pairing coding pattern. I just pair, just like a DNA, if you have seen. The corresponding numbers is paired from in the same order, okay, like that. Whatever they come across, you just concatenate them to each other. This is the pairing coding pattern I apply in my codings. I explain that in more detail, you can have a look. But basically what happens, we combine the first chapter representation number of the even numbers to the first chapter representation number of the odd numbers. So basically, if you do that, what we get is something like this here. You see, we pair them. We pair the even numbers to 287 and 6144. This is the from even chapter, first number of the even chapters. And then it is concatenated with the first chapter of the odd numbers, 1-7-29, you see. And similarly, chapter 4 is concatenated with chapter 3 here, and so on. So we paired them, and we get the representation number at odd and even together. And then we concatenate all of them, again as usually, and get the single big number, and it is this one. So this is the pairing coding pattern. So the corresponding numbers are paired, and again concatenated in the natural orders, and you get the single big representation number. Again, this is 800 digits length number. I do the test here. As you see here is multiple of 19. The mode 19 is 0. So this number, as you see, is different than the Al-Fatiha based coding evidence I showed you before. This is even an odd coded version of that one, and it is again multiple of 19. Can you see what's going on here? So it is not a single, observation. I will show you the similar codings. The two coding patterns exist in the rest of them. I showed you already the probability. So out of 5 of those successes, we observed the 4 successes as well with respect to this odd and even pattern. So we have to try. So why, you might ask, why did we concatenate from even to odd? In this case, because if I concatenate from odd to even, since the order is the same as the original number as we witnessed before in the Al-Fatiha, it would not make any unique. It would not bring any unique information. It would be the same as without doing any even and odd based coding. 1-7-29 and then 2-28 and so on. Therefore, it would be the same number without an even and odd coding pattern. Therefore, we don't try that one. It doesn't make sense because. Okay, therefore, in this case, we cannot try odd and even version. And we observed. We made one test and observed 1 successes. So as per the rule, we have to test all the codings in both text types. This existed in the 6348 verses, all the verses. So the same even and odd coding pattern exists also in the second text type 6236 as well, which I provided as evidence 5.4 here. If you follow the same way, you get this big number. As you see, the only difference is chapter 2 has 1 verses less, 286 verses, because these are all numbered verses and we don't count the unnumbered basmala verse, the beginning verse. And therefore, we get this number, even an odd paired number. And then this number is also multiple of 19 as I tested here. So as you see, the even and odd coding pattern exists in both of the text types. And again, we count them here because we cannot try the odd and even pairing. It doesn't make sense that way. Just even and odd concatenation makes sense in this case. Therefore, we just add 1 to each counters. Okay, next evidence is, again, based on harmony among chapters, verse and words. Now, in this case, as I showed you, this 1-7-29, chapter 1, has also second coding pattern. That is 1 plus, when we count the digits of that, when we sum the digits of this number, 1 plus 7 plus 2.9, that is also 19. So, I hypothesize that if you extrapolate that to the full text of Quran, we should observe the same coding pattern, if this is a clue, right? And I did that, and I witnessed that this also exists in the full text of Quran as well. So this coding pattern exists in the numbered verses. So as you see here, in the second chapter, we have 286 verses. 1 verse less, the unnumbered verse is not here. So digit sum, basically, the digit sum based clue exists in the numbered verses, and only the pure concatenation based clue exists in the full text of Quran 6348 verses. So as you see, both of the text types of Quran has codings, as I hypothesized. Anyways, let's continue. The same thing we are going to do, but we have learned how to code each unit, each chapter unit. So we are going to get the digit sum of each unit because we learned it here, and we get it here. Okay, we first get each chapter number, and we just count their digit sum. We just get their digit sums here, and as you see, chapter 1 has exactly 19 as the digit sum. Chapter 2 has exactly 29 as the digit sum. Chapter 3 has exactly 14 as digit sum. Which numbers we count? We count these numbers. Let me remind you. So we just count digit sum of these numbers for this chapter, digit sum of these numbers for this chapter, digit sum of these numbers for this chapter. So when you count them, you get the representation, digit sum representation of each chapter, because we learned that here, and then we applied the default coding, natural numbers in the natural concatenation of the natural numbers in the natural order, which we do that here. As you see, so we just concatenate those digit sum numbers of each chapter, and then we get this big number again. That the length of this number is 227 digits, length big number. So in this case, again, this is multiple of 19, and therefore we witness that there is also this coding exists in the full text of Quran. So whatever we observe from Al-Fatiha, the first chapter, also exists in the full text of Quran. So we could also try that in the 6,348 verses. Therefore, we have 2 trials and 1 successes. Next, we have to try the odd and even based evidence as well on this coding pattern. There are also some facts. I don't consider them as evidence. I don't therefore calculate their probability. So I will not go over that here. But because they don't fall into my rules, all my rules, although they are very similar. But I also present them in my book because they are very interesting. So you can have a look at them. So I don't want to make this video too long. Okay, now the next evidence should be so what we observed in Al-Fatiha should also have odd and even based evidence. This is the rule. So I have to try them. When we try that digit sum based evidence at the chapter level, we also observe there are odd and even based evidence in this, based on this evidence. So let me show you. Again, remember we have 57 chapters for even and 57 chapters for odd. And what we do is we apply the same coding pattern. We just take the digit sum of each of them, and we get, digit sum of the even chapters and digit sum of the odd chapters. And then, tail of them. So this is the tail of, this is the head of the even chapters. And this is the digit sum of the odd chapters, the head of them. And this is the tail of it. Because there are 114 chapters, I didn't print all of them here. So basically, again, what we do, we just pair them, same coding pattern, pairing coding pattern, and then it means the corresponding chapters are paired. So what you get is this. For example, here the head of that is 29, 19. 19 was the first chapter, remember, digit sum of the first chapter, and the 29 is the digit sum of the second chapter. So even concatenate paired by the odd, based correspondingly. So this is the following, and when you concatenate all those numbers again, what you get is this big number that is again 227 digits, length big number, and this big number is also multiple of 19. So we observe that whatever the coding exists in Al-Fatiha also exists in the full text of Quran, that also have odd and even based evidence. Okay. So we could make 2 trials again, because whatever we apply that to the two text types always, and therefore out of 2 trials we have 1 success in this case. I just add them to the counters. By the way, as you see, those numbers are big numbers, so therefore we can say those are miraculous evidence. Especially, for example, in the beginning there were 800 digits, length big number, because those are not something to be done by hand. If you think you can try to divide that by your hand. You will see it's not something doable easily, or not doable actually. You can try to manually divide them and try to design something. So it's not that something that we can consider. It is not something people can do manually at that time. At the year which the Quran was written, known to be as 632. So manual to calculate, to take those multiplication is not something of that time, people of that time can do. And therefore we can say those are miraculous evidences. The next evidence I will show is at the verse level. So we have observed evidences at the chapter level data. We also have similar codings at the verse level data too. So let me show you. So if you look at Al-Fatiha at the verse level data, we see, for example, verse 1 of Al-Fatiha. This is chapter 1, okay? This is verse 1, verse index 1, and how many words in that verse is 4 words. So when you sum them, you get 6. Okay, 1 plus 1 plus 4 is 6. And then for the second verse of the first chapter of Fatiha, we get 1 plus 2 plus 4, chapter index, verse index, and number of words in that verse. And that is 7, and so on. When you concatenate them in the natural order again, you get this number, this big number. And this is multiple of 19. So again, what was the rule? Whatever we observe as a coding, 19 base coding in the Al-Fatiha, considering chapter, verse and word numbers, we should also observe them in the full text of Quran as well. And that's what I do basically here. Okay. So this is, as you see, the full text, head of the full text of Quran. This is Al-Fatiha. This is only the top 6 verses. So when we apply the same coding pattern to the full text of Quran, 6,348 verses, we observe that the same coding pattern exists in the full text of Quran as well. So basically you sum each chapter information, verse information, and the number of words in that verse, and then you concatenate them. You see, I get it here, 6 ahead of the numbers, 6 and 7, 6, 8, and it goes on. This is the tail of the numbers, 6,348 verses. And when you concatenate them, you get a big number, and it's multiple of 19, as you see here. So the number of digits, this is a very big number, 15,430 digits length number. I can show you the number here. It's very long, okay? It's going to start from the first chapter, you see here, and then goes to all the way down here, just to make you can imagine how long it is, and that's why it is miraculous, like I say. So it is not something people could do at that time. So this long number is multiple of 19, and this is obtained based on the same pattern from Al-Fatiha. Now the next evidence must be the odd and even based evidence with the same pattern, which is based on the rules. So we must try that as well. So if you apply the odd and even based codings on the same pattern, we observe that also exists in this long big number, the odd and even based evidence. So again, we separate verses with respect to the chapter index, as we had done before. So if a verse has an even chapter index, then that verse is designated as an even verse, just as before. So we are using the chapter index to separate, to cluster them as even and odd verses. So when you do that, you get even verses and you get odd verses. But as you see now, the thing is quite different than chapter cases. In the even verses, we get 3,262 verses out of 6,348 verses as even verses. But in the odd verses, we have 3,086 verses. As you see, the number of the verses in odd and even are different. Therefore, this is interesting. When you pair them, now we can also try odd and even base pairing as well. So far in the chapter level data, there was no point, but in the verse level data, we can try that as well. Therefore, we are going to include that into the probability calculations. Okay, we get, again, what we do, we just sum, because this was a coding pattern, remember, from Al-Fatiha. We just sum the chapter information, verse information, and the number of verses in each verse per verse for even level data. And then these are even level verses. And then we do the same for odd verses, and we get numbers for odd verses from this sum coding pattern, basically. And then what we do, okay, we need to pair them. Now the question is, how do you pair two different vectors which have different length? What I do is I just do it again naturally. Basically, we start from 1 to 1 correspondingly, and in the end, one of them is shorter, so the other is longer. The longer it goes as is, normal, naturally, but the shorter one starts from the beginning, turns back and starts from beginning. So how did I discover that? Basically, in the beginning, I didn't think about that, but I just tried with R, just pair. What R does naturally just starts over from beginning, and I saw it worked. And in one of the letter-based evidence, I had hypothesized this coding pattern with different lengths, and it worked. And I realized there is this coding pattern exists. So as we see here, so this makes it more miraculous. So it is beyond kind of design. It's very harder to design. As you see now, when you pair them, even if they are not equal in length, we can pair them naturally, and that big number is also a multiple of 19. So this is the big number. So again, the length is same, 15,867 digits length number. So we could make, so I also counted the number of trials and successes in this case here. So you can take this number, big number, and use a big number calculator and see if it is multiple of 19 or not easily. Just copy paste, you can get that. So there are some facts, again, I'm not going to go over them. We can have a look from the book. Since they are not within the rules that I set forward, I don't count them as evidences, but they are very interesting. You can have a look. Okay, now the evidence 5.9 that shows the harmony between verses and words. So what I look at when I look at the Al-Fatiha, I only look at the chapter, verse, and verse level data that should show us, the intactness of the full text of Quran, because we say Quran is protected word by word, not necessarily letter by letter, although it can be, it's possible, but there is no common letter by letter full text we can say. However, we have common Hafs mushaf, and word by word we have in that. So the way we can test its intactness, if there is a coding or not, is based on the chapters, verses, and words. But we can also, for example, we can also have a look at the verses and word numbers. We can still test the intactness of full text of Quran, because already implicitly the chapter information is embedded in the verse information, because the indexes shows starts from 1 to 7 and then starts again 1 to and so on. Therefore, we can also look at the Al-Fatiha if there are codings between the verse and words numbers. If there is, we can extrapolate that to the full text of Quran and see if it is intact or not. So as long as what we look at the data shows us the full text of Quran with respect to chapters, verses, and words is correct, then we have to look at the Al-Fatiha numbers in the Al-Fatiha if there is a coding pattern. This is the rule. And if there is a 19-based coding pattern, then we should extrapolate that to the full text of Quran. So these are the full set of number of trials we can test. Okay. So if you are looking for what are the maximum number of trials we can do. So therefore, I look at also the verses and words with the numbers between verse and words, because that also proves us the full text of Quran is intact or not, because implicitly we have chapter information. Yeah, anyway, okay. So let's look at the first chapter again, Al-Fatiha. If you look at Al-Fatiha, and if you take the digit sum of all the numbers with respect to the verses and words, you see when you concatenate them, you get this number. So we get chapter 1, and the number of verse 1, it has 4 words. Verse 2, it has again 4 words. Okay. So when you make the digit sum of this number, look at the digit sum of this number, it is multiple of 19. Okay, so I saw this and I extrapolate that to the full text of Quran, and I observed that it also exists in the full text of Quran too. So basically what you do is just concatenate all these verse and word numbers, 1, 4, 2, 4, 3, 2, and so on, until all the, in this case we observe this evidence in the 6,236 numbered verses. So when you concatenate all of them, and then when you look at the digit sum of this big number, you get this number, 81,947. Digit sum of this big number, the length of this big number is 22,051. So from this concatenation operation, basically, and of this concatenation you get 22,051 digits length big number, and when you sum those digits of that big number, you get this number. This is 81,947. And it is multiple of 19. Not only once, but twice, interestingly. It is multiple of 19 twice. Again, we could make 2 trials and add the counters accordingly. And let me show you this big number, by the way. When you concatenate the verses and words level numbers at the full text of Quran with respect to the numbered verses, you get this big number, 22,051 digits it has, you see. So when you sum the digits of each digits of this big number, you get a single number that is also multiple of 19. So where we have learned this coding pattern, we have learned that from the Al-Fatiha. That was the rule. Whatever we observe there as a coding, 19 based coding, we have to extrapolate that to the full text of Quran. So this is what I've done, and I observed that we also see the same coding pattern exists in the full text of Quran. Again, next what we have to do is we have to look at odd and even based evidence exists or not, and I do that here. I discuss that here, but in this case, since we look at the digit sum, it doesn't make sense to look at odd and even base structure data again, because we count the digit sum, so the order is not really important in this case. So when you get a number, you just pair them based on odds and evens, but so there's no point to look at. I mean, I could count them as success because based on the rules, I have to get the odd and even based numbers, and then I have to test it. You see, if it was failure, I had to count that. But now it is successes actually, but I am not going to count them into my counters as successes because I want to be very conservative in my calculations of probability, because I want to make sure what we observe is very convincing for anyone. So I don't want any argument on that. But although these are 2 successes coming here from odd and even based evidence, because these are from the general rules, I could count them, but I will not count them into the counters as successes. I'm talking about here. Let's pass to the next evidence now. Okay, the next evidence is, remember in the previous evidence, what we had done is we had looked at a digit sum of the verse indexes and in number of words in that verse. But because since they are only 1-digit number, they don't have 2-digit sum. They could also be normal sum, decimal sum. So one could argue on that. So I also tested that, and okay, we could also try that as a decimal sum, and because these are natural things that we can try. And when you sum all the numbers, we also observe that the sum of them is also multiple of 19. So okay, these are equivalent in the chapter 1 in the Al-Fatiha, because there are no 2-digit number in that. But when you extrapolate, it becomes it gives us 2 different distinct numbers. So I have to test that, because based on rules, whatever we observe in the Al-Fatiha, I have to test that in the full text of Quran, which I do that here. And again, the numbered verses, I do that. I sum all the numbers as decimal numbers, not as digit sum. And then I get this number, 411,464. And this is again multiple of 19. So we observe that both digit sum and also the decimal sum provides us these evidences. Okay. Similarly, we have to test the odd and even based coding pattern as well. But since we are using sum, we are going to get 2 successes again. But I will not include them with counters, so to be able to have the very conservative probability calculation in the end. Okay, now I have presented all the evidences of the main 19 system of the full text of Quran. I just presented chapter 5 basically. And I calculate here in the next chapters the probability of Al-Fatiha based evidences, as I showed you before. It is 5 success out of 14 trials. That is 5 out of 10,000 probability, very significant statistically. If you look at the odd and even based evidences, so we had 4 success out of 8 trials. Remember, I did not include those some of those odd and even based success as well. So this gives us around, again, 4.5 out of 10,000 probability, very significant. And when you combine them, because this is the main system together, if you combine those numbers, you get 9 success out of 22. And then this gives us less than 1 in a million probability. It's very significant that we can say what we observe cannot occur by chance alone. Okay, But what I do actually, some people, might be a bit skeptical. So for those people, what I do, I multiply the number of trials by 2. Okay, but I will not increase the number of successes. I will keep the number of successes as 9 again, as you see here. But I will multiply the 20 by 2. So let's say we had more trials. We could do more trials that I could not see somehow. But I tried all of them. But let's say that, for the sake of argument. And in that case, we have 44 trials and 9 successes. And if you calculate this probability again with binomial test, you get, again, a very small probability. Let me show it here. 4 out of 10,000. And again, it's very, very significant. By the way, since in statistics, we have to include all the probability of all the events. The number 19 is not any number. So there's also this event. When you look at this system, you also consider this. Number 19 exists in the text of Quran, in the context, and we look at that context and we extrapolate that to the full text of Quran. We look at the structure of that. So we should also consider that with this information. We should say that what is the probability of observing number 19 as an independent verse in Quran that might refer to the coding in the full text of Quran, and along with that, what is the probability of what we observe as a coding. So therefore, if you include observing such a number mentioned in a verse, such a number 19 mentioned in a verse, you should also include that probability. I roughly calculate that such a probability, because there are 114 chapters, as one of 114, and if you include that event as well, this probability goes down again around 1 million, 3 out of 1 million. So in the end, we should also include that probability of observing the number information, the coding 19 coding information within the text, and then along with that, observing all those coding evidences. Okay, I presented all the evidences, and I also talked about the probability. When I talk about this 19-based coding, from the non-Muslims especially, or people who are not that much interested in Quran, their first argument is this. They just say, you see all the coding patterns. You can see from any book the coding patterns, something like that. That's very memorized, common objection I get. This is not true, actually. This is not true because, first of all, the book itself claims that this is a divine book. This is a book from God. And none of the other books has such a claim. So there's no point to look at that. But let's assume, okay, we also look at them, but you cannot look for any coding pattern. I don't, for example, look at anything other than 19. I also only look at 19 because within the context, within the book, we observe, we read that over it is 19. So that we interpret that as there might be a coding in the full text of Quran. And there are also signs in the beginning, in the first chapter, and the Basmala, there are 114 chapters, and so on, along with that. So in this case, when you look at a book, let's say in a random book, in this case, you should also first see a context information that you can interpret to, extrapolate that to the coding that you are going to look for together. So in this case, as you see, you are not going to find too much books, actually, that you can try. If you consider only divine books, the claim books, let's say, there will be very, very few of them, and there wouldn't be much with that context information, like over design, something like that might be interpreted as a coding in the full text. And in the end, you will not have that much books. Okay, so therefore, this is an important point. So whatever you claim, that book must have a content information, like number 19, or something similar. Therefore, this is one thing I want to say. And second thing is, I don't generate the coding rules myself. I just look at the full text of Quran based on Al-Fatiha, assuming that there might be some clues. So you should have reasonable rules, clues that you get from the book. That's something like I do here. Therefore, this is very strong, and I don't think if you can come up with something like that, but you can try. Then we can discuss. Without any evidence for that kind of objection, there's no point to say there are similar things in any book. No, there are not. You should show that in that case, in the similar way, in those similar constraints which I have. Okay, if I have time, I can present the next evidences later on. Chapter 6. Okay, chapter 6 again includes evidences without letters, but these are the rules I set forward. I can explain later. Chapter 7 has letter-based evidences. It's a different topic. I can argue with that. If you have questions, you can reach me from my Twitter account. Actually, you can contact me from my Twitter. I prefer open communication on this one. You can contact me and ask me questions, make some objections. Feel free to do that. This is based on my best ability that I come up with and I witnessed. I thought I should share with you, and I'm sharing. If you see anything, if you raise any objections, you can feel free to do that. I'm happy to listen to you. Thank you very much for listening. I hope it was useful.